Picture this, a burning hot July 4th weekend, an isolated and completely uninhabited island sitting out in the dangerous waters of the Mississippi Sound, a massive crowd of young people partying without supervision, and Nolan Wells, an 18-year-old high school football star, vanishing completely into thin air. Just 2 days later, the lifeless body of Nolan Wells washes ashore right on the sand where Nolan Wells was last seen alive. But that is only where the true nightmare begins. How did an elite private search and rescue team spot Nolan Wells from the sky? And why, the exact minute the body of Nolan Wells was recovered, did every single text message, photo, video, and digital footprint completely vanish from the cell phone belonging to Nolan Wells? Welcome back to Exclusive, Inside the Nolan Wells Rescue and the Deleted Phone Messages Mystery. Today, we are tearing apart the official rescue logs, the chilling aerial details witnessed above Nolan Wells, and the massive, coordinated digital cover-up surrounding the tragic, highly suspicious death of Nolan Wells. It was supposed to be the ultimate summer send-off. July 4th, 2026. Nolan Wells, a young, athletic teenager with his entire bright future ahead of him, hopped onto a boat alongside a group of friends, heading out toward Horn Island, a remote, strikingly beautiful, but completely isolated strip of sand tucked away in the Gulf of Mexico. There are no paved roads, no commercial stores, no running water, no public bathrooms, and crucially, no permanent residents. It is just raw, untamed nature, shifting sand dunes, and violently unpredictable coastal waters. Nolan Wells and his peers joined hundreds of other young people enjoying the holiday weekend isolation. But as the afternoon heat peaked and the alcohol flowed freely on the unsupervised island, the atmosphere shifted drastically. According to the close friends of Nolan Wells, a sudden, minor boat mechanical issue prompted a portion of the group to pack up their belongings and head back toward the mainland earlier than originally planned. And that precise moment is where the entire timeline fractures for Nolan Wells. According to the initial, highly scrutinized accounts given by the companions of Nolan Wells made a completely voluntary choice. They claimed that Nolan Wells wanted to stay behind on the island a little longer because Nolan Wells had allegedly struck up a conversation with a young woman, a mysterious girl named Katie, whom Nolan Wells had reportedly met for the very first time that exact day. They left Nolan Wells right there, stranded on an empty, desert-like island, completely without a boat ride, relying entirely on the fragile promise that Nolan Wells would somehow catch a ride back later with a totally different group of people. But when local investigators and journalists tracked down this elusive, mysterious Katie, her story completely contradicted the friends of Nolan Wells. She firmly claimed that while she did talk to Nolan Wells made it clear he was leaving to get back on the boat with his friends. Both of these statements cannot possibly be true at the same time. Either Nolan Wells stayed behind willingly, or Nolan Wells was abandoned and left behind against his will. And even worse, why would Nolan Wells willingly part ways with his own cell phone, letting it ride safely back on a boat with people Nolan Wells barely knew, while Nolan Wells remained stranded on a deserted island with zero means of modern communication? Night quickly fell on that fateful July 4th. Back on the mainland, the mother of Nolan Wells was growing utterly frantic. Hours passed into the dead of night with no word, no text, and no call from Nolan Wells. By late evening, emergency distress calls were finally placed to the United States Coast Guard and local law enforcement agencies. A desperate search was officially initiated for Nolan Wells, but precious hours had already slipped silently through the cracks of bureaucracy. When morning finally broke on July 5th, the grim reality of the situation fully set in for the family of Nolan Wells. Nolan Wells had spent the entire night exposed to the elements. The United Cajun Navy, a renowned, elite volunteer search and rescue organization, was immediately looped in to assist in finding Nolan Wells. Volunteers rushed to the coastal area, putting heavy-duty rescue boats into the water and deploying high-tech drones to scan the vast, treacherous expanses of Horn Island and Ship Island for any trace of Nolan Wells. But the Gulf weather is notoriously unforgiving and volatile. By mid-afternoon on July 5th, a sudden, violent squall rolled in aggressively from the west, chopping up the Mississippi Sound like a mechanical blender and forcing the rescue crews searching for Nolan Wells to dangerously abort their grid search for the day. Behind closed doors, the seasoned leadership of the search teams huddled together under intense pressure. They knew time was rapidly running out for Nolan Wells. Based on water temperatures sitting comfortably in the upper 70s and low 80s, combined with the lean, low body mass index of Nolan Wells. Scientific calculations showed that if the body of Nolan Wells was submerged underwater, it typically wouldn't surface until day 4, unless extreme, oppressive heat radically accelerated the decomposition process. They needed a wider lens. They needed to take straight to the skies to spot Nolan Wells. At precisely 6:30 a.m. on July 6th, a private aircraft generously donated to the United Cajun Navy lifted off smoothly from Gulfport International Airport. Inside that roaring plane sat Brian Trasher, the vice president of the organization, anxiously scanning the churning water below from hundreds of feet in the air, desperately hoping to locate Nolan Wells. At approximately 8:45 a.m., as the plane banked and looped back toward the dangerous northwestern tip of Horn Island, Brian Trasher noticed something deeply unusual, alarming, and completely out of place for a quiet Monday morning. Heavy law enforcement boats parked in tandem right on the beach, and armed officers tightly congregating on the shoreline directly where Nolan Wells would soon be discovered. Descending rapidly to about 400 or 450 feet, the aircraft flew low and slow over the pounding surf of the beach. That was the exact moment Brian Trasher saw it with his own eyes. A human form lying face down right at the water's receding line, matching the exact physical profile of Nolan Wells. From an aerial vantage point moving at a brisk 90 knots, the visual details were stark, chilling, and unforgettable. The body was still fully clothed, matching the exact description of what Nolan Wells was wearing when Nolan Wells mysteriously disappeared. Because it was only day 2 since the disappearance, the body of Nolan Wells did not show extreme, grotesque decompositional bloating, thanks to the warm Gulf water temperatures naturally accelerating the gases inside the body of Nolan Wells. But the most disturbing, mind-bending element of this grim discovery wasn't just that Nolan Wells was found, but where Nolan Wells was found. Expert search models had firmly predicted that strong southern coastal currents and treacherous rip currents, what veteran sailors grimly call the washing machine of the northwestern tip due to sudden, deadly drop-offs plunging from 2 feet straight down to 20 feet, would have swept the body of Nolan Wells miles away down toward Chandelier Island. Instead, Nolan Wells had washed ashore remarkably close, almost impossibly close, to the exact spot where Nolan Wells was last seen alive by witnesses. Was the tragic fate of Nolan Wells simply a terrible, accidental drowning? Search and rescue experts were quick to point out that the waters surrounding the treacherous northwest tip of Horn Island are violently deceptive. The sudden underwater drop-offs coupled with aggressive, hidden rip currents can easily pull an athletic swimmer, like Nolan Wells, under the surface within mere seconds. Yet, veteran search coordinators noted a stark, glaring contradiction regarding the final hours of Nolan Wells. While accidental drownings in the Gulf are undeniably common, the bizarre, convoluted circumstances surrounding the hours leading up to the disappearance of Nolan Wells cast an impossibly heavy shadow over the official narrative. Why was there a complete, impenetrable black hole of information stretching from 4:30 p.m. on July 4th until the body of Nolan Wells was finally found? Why were so many conflicting, messy stories swirling around regarding who Nolan Wells was actually with on that island? And most importantly, what actually took place during that final, violent verbal altercation caught live on a leaked Snapchat video involving Nolan Wells? As the criminal investigation into the death of Nolan Wells intensified, digital breadcrumbs began to surface on social media platforms like Snapchat, sending shockwaves through the public. A chilling video leaked from the island, capturing the distinct audio of a heated, highly aggressive argument centered directly around Nolan Wells. In that shocking audio clip, a panicked voice, believed by multiple independent witnesses to be Nolan Wells, shouts desperately, "Give me my effing phone. What the F are you doing?" Another hostile voice fires back aggressively from the background, "Get off me. Get the F off this boat. F you, bro." That leaked audio sparked a fierce, nationwide debate across major media outlets and legal teams regarding the final moments of Nolan Wells. Half of the witnesses and friends came forward insisting, "No, that wasn't Nolan Wells speaking. That was someone else entirely getting into an unrelated argument." Meanwhile, other knowledgeable sources fiercely insisted the voice belonged directly to the missing Nolan Wells, capturing the exact second a violent, physical dispute broke out on board a vessel before Nolan Wells vanished. If a physical altercation actually occurred, and if Nolan Wells was forcibly targeted, attacked, or separated from the group, the entire neat narrative that Nolan Wells stayed behind willingly completely collapses under its own weight. If the audio evidence regarding Nolan Wells was deeply troubling, What happened to the physical cell phone of Nolan Wells next crossed straight into the territory of a dark psychological thriller. When the mother of Nolan Wells desperately tried to track her missing son using modern digital mapping apps, she hit an immediate brick wall of impossible discrepancies regarding Nolan Wells. Her professional tracking software displayed two completely different, contradictory stories for the phone of Nolan Wells. Life 360 showed the exact phone location of Nolan Wells residing safely back on dry mainland land, while Snapchat simultaneously indicated coordinates floating right out in the open coastal water where Nolan Wells was last active. How on earth can the phone of Nolan Wells register in two completely different geographical places at the exact same time? Simple logic dictates that someone had to be physically moving the phone of Nolan Wells. Someone had to be carrying it back across the open water while Nolan Wells was left behind on the island. And when the phone of Nolan Wells was finally recovered and handed over to the grieving family, the contents waiting inside triggered immediate, blaring alarm bells for everyone investigating Nolan Wells. Nolan Wells was a typical 18-year-old, hyper-connected to the digital world, taking photos constantly, recording videos of everyday life, and utilizing Snapchat religiously to document everything. But when the family of Nolan Wells finally unlocked the device, they found an absolute, chilling vacuum. The entire digital timeline of July 4th for Nolan Wells had been ruthlessly scrubbed clean. There were zero saved videos, zero pictures from the massive island party, and zero chat histories associated with Nolan Wells. Now, normal Snapchat messages naturally disappear after being viewed once, but app settings can be manually manipulated, or data belonging to Nolan Wells can be deliberately, manually deleted. High-profile attorneys representing the heartbroken family of Nolan Wells pointed out the glaring, impossible statistical anomaly of a teenager like Nolan Wells spending an entire holiday day at a massive summer bash without leaving a single digital footprint behind. Did someone purposefully wipe the phone of Nolan Wells? Did friends who allegedly possessed the device of Nolan Wells clear the browsing and message history out of blind panic? Or was there a calculated, sinister effort to conceal digital conversations and threats that took place right before Nolan Wells vanished forever? Renowned psychological experts weighed in heavily on the digital blackout surrounding Nolan Wells, noting a chilling, predictable behavioral pattern common in tragic adolescent death cases. When a group of young people experience a sudden, catastrophic tragedy involving underage drinking, hidden altercations, or reckless, dangerous behavior on an isolated island where Nolan Wells was last seen alive, raw fear becomes the primary human driver. Fear of severe legal consequences for what happened to Nolan Wells. Fear of taking the blame for ruined life. Fear of what the unfiltered, brutal truth might reveal about the actions taken toward Nolan Wells. When teenagers panic after a friend like Nolan Wells goes missing, their immediate, instinctual reaction is almost always self-preservation, deleting text messages, wiping app histories, and fiercely aligning their stories to protect themselves from the truth about Nolan Wells. But as grief-stricken families know all too well, dark secrets do not protect anyone. They only prolong the agonizing pain of ambiguity surrounding Nolan Wells. Dissatisfied with local loops of information and seeking absolute, undeniable objectivity in the mysterious case of Nolan Wells, the family of Nolan Wells took an extraordinary, unprecedented legal step. They had the body of Nolan Wells flown privately from Mississippi all the way to Washington, D.C. for an independent, second autopsy conducted by elite medical professionals with zero financial or political ties to local southern jurisdictions. Medical examiners examining Nolan Wells faced a classic, high-stakes forensic hurdle. When the body of Nolan Wells was recovered from warm coastal waters days after death, differentiation becomes an intricate puzzle. Pulmonary edema, dangerous fluid buildup in the lungs, can indicate a fatal drowning, but it can also mimic the exact physiological signs of a fatal drug overdose or physical trauma for someone like Nolan Wells. Specialized toxicology screens take weeks to carefully process for Nolan Wells. Was Nolan Wells chemically impaired? Was Nolan Wells incapacitated before ever entering the water? Or did the hidden physical evidence beneath the surface tell a darker story of blunt force trauma that preliminary visual checks on Nolan Wells couldn't catch simply because Nolan Wells was lying face down in the surf? The United Cajun Navy even stepped forward with a secondary, startling offer that rattled local circles regarding Nolan Wells. They offered to bring specialized K-9 units trained to detect microscopic traces of human blood onto the boats of every single person who was present the day Nolan Wells died. As veteran search experts noted, chemical household cleaners can alter a visible crime scene, But highly trained forensic detection dogs can pinpoint biological indicators that regular cleaning completely misses regarding the tragedy of Nolan Wells. The lingering, haunting question remains for Nolan Wells. If everyone involved was completely innocent of any wrongdoing, why hesitate to clear every single vehicle, boat, and vessel involved in the final hours of Nolan Wells? The solemn funeral for Nolan Wells has come and gone. Instead of joyfully preparing for upcoming college classes and autumn football games, a deeply grieving family has buried Nolan Wells, left to navigate the excruciating, daily pain of unanswered questions about Nolan Wells. The rescue mission successfully brought Nolan Wells home to his parents, closing one chapter of the nightmare, but wide opening a much darker, complex investigation into human behavior, conflicting testimonies, and vanished digital data concerning Nolan Wells. Was Nolan Wells truly the victim of a ruthless, unforgiving Gulf current? Or did something deeply sinister happen in the dark shadows of Horn Island while everyone looked the other way from Nolan Wells? The phone data of Nolan Wells may have been deleted. The stories told about Nolan Wells may sharply conflict, but the relentless pursuit of truth regarding Nolan Wells refuses to wash away with the tide. If you have any information regarding the final hours of Nolan Wells, authorities and independent investigative teams continue to urgently urge you to come forward. Because secrets hidden in the sand regarding Nolan Wells never stay buried forever.